My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a Ford observer and a military police officer. I've spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to the DTD Podcast. We took a week off, but this week we had to take a break for this guy, Lino Miani. He is the president of combatdiver.org, and he is a board member of GAC Global, the Hague Policy Group. He was first Special Forces Group. He's a combat diver, and he's kind of done a lot of stuff that I had never even heard of. So welcome to the show, Lino.
Thanks, DJ. It's great to be here, man.
So first off, when we started talking, we realized that we were at the same unit at the same time before you got Hollywood and went over to Special Forces and everything. We were in the same division at one time. So best memory of the 25th, because to me, it's the best unit there is in the Army. So
yeah, I tend to agree with you. You know, and I always attributed that to 25th ID being a little bit lower on the sort of deployability priority list. We never had as much money or resources, and so we just spent the time pounding the ground, man. I mean, that was the men were hard. They were tough. The terrain was tough. The challenges in the small infantry tactics world were pretty difficult. And when you look across the force now, you see a lot of these guys, the leaders, have 25th infantry time. Yep.
Yeah. What I remember the most was what was great about it was not only the training, but also the schools that were available, because I think at that time they had like the best RIP program in the Army. They had an air assault school. You could get into dive school out there. They had a ton of stuff. And now I guess they have like jungle school and all kinds of stuff.
I was just seeing that recently. They've reopened the jungle training kind of curriculum down there.
Yeah.
I guess it's in East Range where it rains all the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Where it sucks the most over there.
Where it sucks the most.
Yeah.
I always avoided that place.
Yeah. So, what I liked the most about it was because, people would hear and they would say, oh, you're stationed in Hawaii, it must be a hard life. And I'm like, you have no idea what it's like to be out on training for 30 days. It sucked out there. I mean, no snakes. I was happy about that there were no snakes in Hawaii.
There were the wild boars there that would
run
through your rucksack.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that all sounds nice and cuddly until you see a male boar like bearing down on it. It's not fun.
Yeah. And I will tend to agree with people. Hawaii was not a bad duty station. My wife was stationed at Tripler. I was over at Schofield. And there was a ton of stuff to do over there. Like like anything you really wanted to do. And the food, I think, is what I miss the most over there.
Oh man, I'm not sure I want to talk about what I miss the most, but I was a young 20-something single lieutenant, and I just remember not wanting to go to sleep.
Yeah,
I'm really not entirely joking about that. I would take Mondays off because I would just be so smoked. It was a blur of pound on the ground Monday to Friday, coming out of the field, surfing literally twice a day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. If we had a 4-day, which we almost always did.
Aloha Friday.
Yeah. And then, I was out partying in downtown Hawaii or Honolulu until the wee hours of the morning. I'd sleep in my truck with my surfboard, and the sun comes up, I'd be in the water.
Where was your favorite place to surf?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I really liked a couple of places on the west side. There was one called Tracks, which was near what a lot of people identify as Electric Beach.
Okay.
Just had a really fast little wave that very few people surfed on, so it was almost never crowded. It was shallow and it was fun, pretty consistent, and I just liked being out there. The waves weren't often very big. You get these head high waves, which were a lot of fun to play on.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of time in the water.
I think my favorite place, I didn't surf a lot, I dove a lot over there. And I think my favorite place to dive was probably, Haleiwa Trench.
Yeah.
I think that
Yep.
was probably
I've
my
heard that's a
favorite.
pretty neat place. I've never dove it.
It's so you can kind of go up to the edge and stand on it, and it almost like you're standing on a cliff, and then you just fall down into the inside of it, and it's almost like you're falling down it. It's very cool. Lots of turtles down there and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So the
Good
the
stuff.
problem with Hawaii diving is there if you get in, like I thought Waikiki would be good, but it's not because it's so sandy and it kicks up so much, and
Yep.
it's just
Yep.
not a good place. But if you go out to like Diamond Head or Turtle Bay or somewhere kind of out there, then you get a lot better diving, better night dives and stuff like that. So, and then of course going to dive school over there, I got to dive all over Pearl Harbor. So,
Fun fact: I never dove until I went to combat dive
is that right?
qualification course. Yep, never did it.
So let me ask you real quick, and we'll get back on track. But I gotta ask this: if you had never dove before, and you went to dive school, when you got to pool week or whatever they called it in the school that you went to, how did you handle that with getting hit? And
I think by the time you get to that, I mean, you've done all the pool events. It's not. I don't know. I didn't. It wasn't something that I felt I needed experience for. I was good in the water. I was a good swimmer. I knew how to relax to conserve oxygen. And so by the time you get through those individual pool events, and you get to the point where you're actually sucking on scuba gear, it really wasn't much of an issue.
yeah,
They taught us everything we needed, I guess.
yeah, they called it underwater problem solving when I went there, and so
Yeah, I seem to remember that.
yeah, so they would start us out in pairs. You would swim around. They would kind of hit both of you, shark both of you, but they would focus on one of the group, and then the other one would kind of be the air guy because the other guy's tanks were tied up or whatever it was. And then you would go around when you were done with that. You would go around on singles. And I remember I went through this one time we got hit, and I was with a Marine, was my like scuba buddy that day, and he gets hit and he finds his air and he just starts sucking on it, and I'm working on my tanks and I'm giving him the symbol like, hey, I'm out of air. And he's just staring at me, just sucking on air and blowing. I was like, you son of a bitch.
See, I had the opposite experience. At Key West, they call that the two-man comp. And you're right. They start both of you on scuba gear, and you're supposed to just swim back and forth along the line. And then, one of you loses your tanks is the scenario, and you kind of have to work through getting hit and having obstacles together as a team. And I had a 19-year-old Air Force airman, an E1 or an E2, who was my partner that day, and he had just failed that same event with a different partner. So they recycled him over to me, and I was like, oh, great, man, I got this kid, 19-year-old kid, just failed. I'm not sure how he's going to handle this, and I could get screwed as a result. But he was an absolute hero. The dude was like giving me the regulator, like, here, you take it. Okay, I'll breathe.
And usually that doesn't happen. Usually they're so wound up from that first one that when they get going on the second one, it's just chaos underwater. So that worked out well for you then.
Yeah, he was quite the hero. I was impressed with that kid after that.
So Lino, let's go over your career a little bit. We've talked about that, but you started out at West Point.
Yep.
I know that both your parents were military.
Yep.
Was this a goal your whole life? I mean, because you talk to some of these guys and they're like, yeah, that's all I wanted to do my whole life. I just wanted to be in the military. I wanted to be special forces. I wanted to do this. Was this what you had in mind?
It was probably less melodramatic. I just kind of assumed I'd end up in the military. It was a family business in a way. Mom and dad were both, enlisted Air Force. And then, my father got commissioned when I was a kid, but all my aunts and uncles were either in the military or civilians working for the military. I spent my entire life growing up on Air Force bases. So it's kind of like, it just seemed like the thing to do.
Right.
And so I don't think I got to the point where I was sort of pursuing a dream until probably when I started thinking that I needed to go to West Point. And at 16 years old or 15 years old, however old I was, you put West Point on a pedestal and the standards are really high to get in. And I was a good student, but not a great one. A pattern that continued through my university years, by the way. But yeah, I mean, I was a good student. I made the honor roll, but I wasn't like a straight A guy. And so I just remember thinking, like, man, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to get into this thing, and if I do, I'm going to be clawing my way to stay in to graduate. That was my thinking, completely based on nothing. But it turned out, it wasn't quite that difficult, and yeah, it was a fun time. I mean, anytime you're in a circumstance with 1,000 people of your same age and you're kind of all working towards the same eventual goal, you really make lasting relationships, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, anybody who's been in the military has kind of experienced that at some point.
So when you're there, is it from the inside? Is it a cutthroat? Because I feel like it would be more cutthroat than a normal college, and not necessarily in the sense that people are gonna try and make you fail, but I feel like they might not help you along the way as much because everyone's trying to compete there.
I would say kind of the opposite.
Okay.
Everybody's trying to work together to get to the end of that tunnel. The ranking system, and there's three parts to it. There's your academic, military, and your physical rank. And so they have all these events throughout your 4 years that you're going to get scored on, and you're going to end up with a rank, a very definitive system that they have for measuring everybody. And so you don't really have to compete against, I wouldn't have to compete against you in order to have my class rank go up. I would just have to do better on my tests. I'd have to run faster. I'd have to, do better in my military ranking evaluations or whatever, and I'd have to do better in school. So there wasn't this sense of kind of competing with one another very much at all, to be honest. You were competing against the big gray machine, really, and that's neat. That was something that kind of disappeared I moved up the ranks, the officer ranks in the Army. It started to become a competitive thing. It wasn't like that at West Point.
And so let's talk about that for a minute. So as you leave there and you're used to, just being the big gray machine, how do you look at it when it starts being cutthroat, moving up through the ranks?
For me, it was a bit of a trauma, to be honest. And I didn't really sense it until I was a major. And maybe
you've been around for a while if you're a major before you realize it.
Yeah. I think when you're a lieutenant in a line battalion like I was in the infantry, there's still that sense of camaraderie, and there's a little bit less of the competition against one another at that level. That didn't really manifest until you started moving up a little bit higher in the chain. And in SF, I went from the infantry straight into SF training. You're in a school environment, and that's not really, so cutthroat. You're competing against the machine, not each other in a course. Then you get to the unit and you're kind of focused on your little piece of the pie. And in my case, it was my ODA or the ODAs that I commanded. And you don't really, or at least I didn't, and maybe this is my naivete, I didn't really get that sense of, hey, we're competing against each other.
Okay.
Kind of knew intellectually that was happening, but it wasn't so nasty. When I became a major and I came back to the unit for a second time, that's when I really kind of realized it. A bit too late for my own good, frankly, but that's all right.
And so what are some of the things that you're seeing where this is making it kind of apparent to you? What are you seeing differently the second time you come back?
Officers bad-mouthing each other to commanders.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just something that I just didn't really see when I was a young captain or a lieutenant. As a major, that became a little bit more apparent. And, not having worked in a corporate environment in a civilian world, I've been a government guy in a couple different ways, but I imagine it's similar in the corporate world. You're trying to climb a ladder, it's a rat race or whatever. And, so I don't know that it's unique to the military, but it was news to me actually when I came back as a major. And part of that was too, I was sort of disconnected. And this is a bit about my career that's maybe interesting to some, is that after my team time, and when I left the unit, I left to go on a scholarship. That it's the Olmsted Foundation Scholarship, and it's a private foundation that spends money to send U.S. military officers to grad school outside the United States and outside the Western sort of, or at least the U.S. English-speaking cultural context. So I went to grad school in Malaysia, and in Malaysia, I was immersed in the embassy environment. I was immersed in an academic environment, which was completely different than, the U.S. kind of conception of academia. Culturally immersed in a completely different society. So coming back to the military at that point, it was like the military had changed, but I hadn't. I was still kind of viewing everything as a captain that had left an SF battalion 3 years earlier, or 4 years earlier, actually.
So I'm guessing, and the way I'm looking at it is, are you getting any flack from people that are going, we've been here pounding the ground and you've been fucking whipping
Yeah.
a pencil in school. Who the fuck are you
Yeah.
to come back here? And
Yeah, absolutely. Got a lot of that. And most of it came from people above me, actually. We're like, all right, you've been fucking off for 3 years or 4 years or whatever now. Now it's time to pay your dues.
But
And I was like,
I mean, technically you had already paid your
doing?
dues. You led ODAs and everything, so
Yeah, it's just it's like one commander said, look, if you want to be in the SF regiment, stay in the SF regiment. And there's a lot of truth to that. And I was actually told that before I left, frankly. I didn't really believe it, I guess. I didn't get the memo, so to speak. Because, and it was an idealistic view on my part, looking back on it. We going through the Q course and being recruited into SF, we were told and led to believe and trained in a way that culture, language, knowing your context you're going to be operating in is very important to accomplishing the mission. And it is, and the regiment does value it, but frankly, they value being in the slog in the regiment more. And so when I was out of it, even though I came back with some really probably valuable insights, I've been out of it. Been out of it for a while.
And on that note, when you talk about that, because I think at that time the Army was kind of transitioning, because I'm figuring that was probably 2001, 2002 for you.
No, it was much later. So I got to the team in 2003.
Okay.
Correction. Got to the unit in 2003. The team I got to in early 04. So 03 or 04. God, I'm getting old, man. In any case, I didn't get to Malaysia until 06.
Okay.
Late 06.
At that time, if I'm remembering, as like 01, 02, before the War on Terror and everything, the Army started really pushing for their field grade officers and their senior non-commissioned officers to be very educated. I think at one point they were saying if you wanted to be like a sergeant major, you needed to have a bachelor's degree or maybe even a master's degree. I'm not sure, but they were really pushing for education. And it kind of seems like a real dichotomy with the way that you're expressing it too, is that they want these guys educated and worldly and all these things, but when they go to do it, then they tell them, well, you should have been here the whole time doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was a complaint that a lot of us had about a lot of things. For example, just being language proficient, especially in 1st Special Forces Group, where there were 14 languages associated with our unit in that region of the world. And it was just most of them were very difficult languages too, by the way. So it took a long time a training investment of years and a lot of money to get a guy to a certain level of proficiency um, in his target language. And it was, it was all great for the leadership to say, languages are important, but at the end of the day, they were only as important as you had time for, from other things that were actually more important. So there's a balance, and I'm not saying this to be critical of the regiment or even First Special Forces Group. It was sort of a reality of things, and I'm glad that I was in a unit that at least recognized the value of knowing your region, being an expert, having some cultural and language proficiency. But at the same time, it was always a little bit disappointing for those of us who really valued it, to see how much effort the unit was willing to put forward to achieve it. So it's a bureaucratic reality, DJ. It's just that's the way it is.
Yeah.
It's much easier in units like 7th Special Forces Group, which they have Spanish and a little bit of Portuguese, which is very similar. So you can get proficient in a language like that, and that unit can operate much more effectively in terms of language than First Group could.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because I think you were supposed to be with 7th Special Forces in the beginning. You spoke Spanish, but I won't say flirted, but you definitely raised the desires of someone who was very helpful in the assignment to 1st Special Forces.
Yeah, that's kind of a funny story. So, I mean, I wanted to go to First Group. I didn't have a First Group target language or anything close to it. I had Spanish, and I was scoring a 3.3 well before, or excuse me, like a 2+2+, well before I got to SF. So when I got to the course, somebody, and it was Steve Johnson, who was later battalion commander in First Group. He was the branch guy. And he said, "Lino, you're going to 7th Group because you speak Spanish. Congrats." And I was like, for reasons I won't get into, I was like, man, 7th is not what I wanted to do. Even though I had Spanish language, I wanted to go to First Group. And I ended up kind of spending a little bit of time and attention on the lady in comfortable shoes that writes the list of who gets orders to wear in the headquarters. And it was an older lady, and I used to bring her popcorn and tell her her shoes look nice and all that. And she advised me to go.
The simpler times when popcorn and you look nice worked.
Well, it took 3 weeks, which
lady, I don't have all day here.
Yeah, I was like, come on, can we get to the thing where you give me the orders to First Group? But she told me to go take the Japanese test because I thought I could maybe score something on that from time in Hawaii and knowing some Japanese girls.
I spent 4 years in Hawaii. I don't know a lick of Japanese.
Yeah, I didn't either. I thought I did, but yeah, I didn't. So I took the test, got a 0.0, and she put Japanese next to my name, and that was it. I was off the First Group.
Yeah, you got thrown out of someone's office for that.
Yeah, well, when you show up at First Special Forces Group and the colonel says, "What language do you speak?" and you look him dead in the eye and you say, "Sir, I speak fucking Spanish." He kicked me right out of his office on the first day, which wasn't a great start, but.
Well, let's get into kind of your career. Now, what's interesting to me about your career is not only have you done these things, but you've written about them. You've kind of blogged your career, I think, in looking through all the stuff that you wrote about special things. And I picked a couple of the stories that I wanted to talk about just because I think that they had an effect on not only your career, but kind of the shape that your life took and the directions that you went in. And the first one I wanted to talk about is Diving with Ivan. And I want you to set up this story because if you just read the story, it's very much split down the middle, and it's two different stories going on at the exact same time, and you don't really figure that out until close to the end of the story. So let's talk about that. I want to talk about your buddy Mike, what he was doing, what he meant to you, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so the story is really about Mike Tarlovsky, and that's not really apparent until the end. But Mike and I were lieutenants together in 2.5 Infantry in Hawaii, and Mike was one of those guys that he was more alive than the rest of us. He probably, he was late 20s, and he probably lived as much as 60 years of life. I mean, he was constantly going. He was never at rest. He was always doing interesting stuff, and he just had an amazing well of energy, and he was a great leader. And I say that without any sense of irony whatsoever. He was a great leader, and a good friend. So I learned a lot from Mike as an officer and as an infantryman. And he went SF, and he was in fifth group. He was a combat diver in the brief period of time that he was in fifth group before deploying to Afghanistan, or actually between Afghanistan and 2001, actually, and then Iraq in 2003. He had gone to dive school. So combat diver, Green Beret, and a great leader. And he was a troop commander in the Sinks and Extremist Force in 5th Special Forces Group in 2004. And at the time, the United States.
If I could stop you real quick, and the only reason I want to stop you is, can you explain to the people that might not know what that extremist group is? Because there's different levels, and I don't think a lot of people know what that extremist group is.
Yeah, there's a company reserved, or at least there used to be a company reserved in each regionally oriented special forces group. There's a company that kind of specializes in urban warfare and close quarters battle, and that was the unit that Mike was in. So they're all specially trained. There's a school that they go to, and they operate at a very, very high level of proficiency. And so what's valuable about those companies specifically is that the theater commanders have operational control of them and can apply them in an extreme situation to apply force anywhere in their region. And in this particular case, Mike was operating in southern Iraq, and I believe it was in Basra. And at the time, the United States was fighting the Mahdi army, al-Sadr's boys. And this is a political faction within the Iraqi political sphere, and arguably described as a militia. And they were on the wrong side of the United States, so we were attacking them. And the SIF was instrumental in that. So it was heavy, intense urban combat, pretty up close and personal. And they chased some guys into a house, and I'm recounting this story secondhand, but they followed some guys they were chasing into a house, and entered the house and assaulted it. And there was from the door, there was a stairway leading up directly in front of the door, and one of the enemy had posted up a strong position at the top of the stairs and was throwing grenades and sending direct fire down onto the doorway. Makes sense. And the first man through the door was injured by a grenade that had come down. Mike was the second man. So when the first man went down, Mike was standing there assaulting through the doorway, and he got shot in the face. I mean, just right there between the eyes. AK-47, that was it. Mike, my friend, and in a way, my mentor, a young father. Joey was 1.5 years at the time. Combat diver, Green Beret, well regarded in 5th Special Forces Group, died instantly. And it's not very often you see a young captain in a Special Forces unit have quite the emotional impact on that unit that Mike Tarlovsky had on 5th Special Forces Group. And as a result, and I discovered this years later talking to folks about this, the Army Special Ops in general changed the way they dealt with stairs as a result. So they changed the tactics by learning from what happened to Mike. And that's sort of a hard truth to deal with for us, because you're kind of like, well, man, if we had practiced more, if we had thought about that, or if we had prepared ourselves in a certain way, maybe we'd have taken those stairs differently, and maybe Mike would be alive today. You don't really dwell on it. It is what it is. But it was a bit of a sad story. But you mentioned two stories going on at once.
Right.
The second story to that was me going through dive school and kind of having that experience at the same time that Mike was killed in action. And so it was actually the weekend before I reported to Key West, a couple of days prior, actually, that I got the call that, Mike had been killed in action. And I made the decision to go ahead and go to dive school because I had that slot and I was going to go. And I knew I was going to miss his funeral. His funeral was at Arlington during the first week of my course. And, I thought about that, and it wasn't easy for me to be sitting there in the barracks that night. My brother and sister went, and they called me and told me about it. But I also knew that Mike Tarlowski would have been really, really pissed off if I had left dive school to go to his funeral. That's, it's just, you just don't do that. So I stayed there and I tried to honor him as best I could. And one of the ways I did that was to find his class plaque on the wall. And now, for those of you who don't or aren't familiar, every class at the dive school, at least at Key West, going back to the beginning, which is sometime in the early to mid 60s, has made a class plaque. And the vast majority of them have pictures of all the guys that went to the course on the plaque. And this is a really unique historical resource, right? This is a small niche group of people within a small niche group of special operators that have collected these memories and put them on the walls in this facility down in Key West. And so years later, when I was a company commander, I went down to observe some training at the schoolhouse there. It was the last time I'd been back. And I went on this journey of discovery to find my plaque and some of the other folks that I knew. And I realized those plaques were in bad shape. And they just, and I tell this story a lot because it's the reason that I started the Combat Diver Foundation, was initially to preserve that artifact, those class plaques, because nobody was doing it. Now, this was 2010. And this is not to point fingers at anybody. Maintaining and restoring a historical artifact requires money, it requires time and a mandate. The cadre down at the school don't have that. So the plaques were protected by the cadre, sort of, out of respect for all of us that had gone to the school, and just knowing the inherent value of these things. But they weren't historical artifacts in any official way. They weren't even official property. In fact, they were just officially they were junk. And so you're one commander decision away from someone saying, look, I don't have room for these things, and they're taking up space, and we got to get rid of them, throw them in the trash or take them home or whatever. And that's sort of an unfortunate, but it would have been an understandable decision at some point, because those plaques were, 40 years of class plaques was starting to accumulate. And so I had it in my mind that something must be done. That phrase, somebody has to do something. Well, that right. Somebody was me. So I started, years later, I started calling and sending emails and sort of advocating for the preservation of these things. And I think I pissed off enough people that somebody said, well, we should probably do something. And instead of just making them unit property, they made them an Army historical artifact. So that's great news, right? Those things are, they're going to be protected for, gosh, who knows, decades, centuries, by the Center for Military History that runs the Army Museum system. So it's good news. Bad news was when I discovered this, I had already founded the Combat Diver Foundation. And as I mentioned to you, our initial mandate was to preserve the plaques, or help the Army preserve the plaques. We weren't able to do it. Those plaques are historical artifacts, and allowing a private organization to get their hands on them is a really difficult bureaucratic kind of tangle.
So you kind of ended up shooting yourself in the foot, kind of.
In a way, I mean, I accomplished the mission in a certain sense. Now, right. SWCC doesn't have the money either,
right?
To be frank. And there was a lot of drama with the Special Warfare Museum, which is the owner of those artifacts, last year. That's been partially resolved, but it's not clear yet, what money or what people they have to prioritize to actually preserve those blacks. It's an expensive and delicate process. So
Right.
it's a long-term thing. Now we're positioned to help if and when we can, but we've also expanded the mission of the Combat Diver Foundation out beyond this one class of artifacts into preserving the history of the combat dive community writ large. And so that includes the entire Joint Force. You know, the Marines are involved, the Air Force guys, the Navy SEALs. It also involves the Allies. You know, the Combat Diver Foundation has members in 6 countries and growing.
Right.
Yeah, and we like it that way because I mean, you really can't make an argument that the Royal Marines aren't combat divers. And so why not preserve their history too?
I think the most interesting thing about the Combat Diver Foundation is that you took an approach to it that would seem odd to people looking in on it for the first time. You took people that weren't combat divers and put them in positions of power in the unit in order to run it like a business so that it stayed focused on mission, stayed focused on what needs to be done. And that was super interesting to me because you're bringing in, I mean, it goes against everything. It's almost counterintuitive. You're bringing in people that have no idea of the love that goes into it or, the emotion that goes with it, but they're making it carry forward way further than probably someone with just emotion could do for it because they're looking at it from a money standpoint, a business view, and to mesh those two worlds together really makes it a powerful organization.
Yeah. And it's you actually characterize it really well there, DJ. We're running an organization, man. It's not a good old boys club for combat divers. Now there is an aspect of that.
Of course.
We're about to have our reunion here in August, and we're gonna shake the combat diver fist and beat our chest and tell a bunch of cool stories and make ourselves sound cool. But the reality is we're running an organization, and I got to make that organization function effectively. And I think if we were to succumb to the good old boy club system, we would actually be less effective. So it's important to me that Steve Kane, the executive vice president, is not a combat diver. That said, Steve's a Green Beret, and he's a retired 06 and operated at a very high level. So he's savvy about how large organizations work and how the military makes decisions about certain things. And that's what I valued in him. And he and I worked together at NATO. And so I trust him because we had a working relationship prior to. And so Steve's an invaluable member of the team. He's not a combat diver. And just about everybody on the staff is either a combat diver or SF connected. So our store manager, her husband's a Green Beret. She's a retired NCO. The lawyer's a combat diver. I think only the accountant has no connection. But he's the accountant, so
he's
it's
the accountant, so that's probably good that he knows how to do the math.
But we do recognize that we have to at least have. We do need to maintain that connection. And so for that reason and others, I established the board of advisors, and we've got several advisors which have, in some cases, some specific sort of outreach kind of responsibilities. In others, it's more general, but they're all combat divers, and that's a requirement to be on the board of advisors. And their job is really to connect to the combat diver community and help us understand how the community is thinking and feeling about what we're doing and making sure that we're on the right track.
And so with this, I don't think you had one last year just because of COVID, but this deep dive, the reunions, what's going to be the main goal of those to bring those guys together? Of course, like you said, it's not only to shake your fists and talk stories. There's a very good meaning behind it. So if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we've got a couple of parts of the event. So there's a 5K on the beach. There's a charity dive, and there's the party and the raffle and the auction, the music, demonstration, static display, all these things that we're trying to put together. But the 5K in particular is an important event for us. One, it's the first time we've done 5K, but two, we decided early on that we would make it a memorial event. So the 5K specifically is a memorial to honor the memory of John Werka, warrant officer from 7th Special Forces Group, who, and I'm going to use a phrase that my our future intern gave me. She's a social media professional, and she was like, "Gosh, it's hard to imagine that a guy like John Werka, a Green Beret and a combat diver, who had overcome so many obstacles and fought so many battles in his life, and the one that he ended up losing was the one with mental health." And it's a story that affects so many veterans and frankly, active servicemen nowadays. And that's, we're hearing that there's, the force has been deployed over and over and over again. You hear about these guys with 11 tours and 7 tours. And when you're home, you're not really home because you're training, prepping for the next one or going to a school or whatever. And it guys break. Hard men break. And
absolutely.
Women. And it happens. And they need, we need to recognize that. And we as a force need to deal with it. And I think the military takes it seriously and is increasingly so. From the time when I was on a team, we didn't hear much about, soldier mental health. But now it's a serious consideration for commanders and senior enlisted leaders to think about. So we're coming into this at the right time. I think the force and the American public has been made aware that there is a problem. That there's a problem. Guys like John Werka, who fought those battles, it's an avoidable tragedy potentially.
I
So how do we do
absolutely, yeah, I absolutely agree. I've talked to lots of guys on this show that they talk about that. I talked to Tom Satterley, who was very close to taking his own life.
Tom has supported us in the past, so Tom's a hero.
But I talked to these guys. I talked to Mark Bayless a couple weeks ago, and he has set up the Valor Clinic. Mm-hmm. And so what he does is take guys that not only have maybe mental health issues, but are homeless, and gets them in housing, gets them work. And the amazing thing about his organization was they have like I think it was only like 5 people out of all the people they've helped have had recidivism and gone back into being home. Yeah, I mean but he says, just like you, we have to approach it from a different angle. We can't look at it anymore as these guys are hard. We don't need to worry about them. I mean, Tom says all the time, check on your strongest friends, because those are the ones that are, and you hear it time and time and time again. The only thing I would disagree with you about what you said is that I don't think that it's been taken by the military or by the DOD or by Veterans Affairs seriously until recently.
Yeah.
And it's almost fair. Like they've forced their hand to take it seriously.
Yeah. It takes a lot to make that big machine move.
Right.
Good thing is I think it's moving in the right direction. We're going to hopefully give it a little bit of a push here with the deep dive in 2021. And we're going to do that talking about, John Werka and his struggle. This was not a guy that we could look at and say, well, he was just not, he wasn't an accomplished person. He wasn't, we can't say that about John Werka. Guy was a combat diver, for God's sake. He was a leader in 7th Special Forces Group. So we can't just write this off in some other way. It's got to be, when we're hoping to bring some awareness to the mental health issues that soldiers and servicemen face, soldiers and veterans face, because it is real.
It's very much so. Real quick, and we'll come back to it at the end, but I do want to point out that with this deep dive, you have, of course, the 5K. There's a dive for qualified divers that can mess around on that. There's a charity raffle. There's a charity auction, live music, lots of drinking at the Floribama Lounge. I guess that's the largest bar in Perdido Key.
It's the largest beach bar in Florida.
Oh, okay. Well,
and
my
it's
mistake.
owned by Yeah, and it's owned by a guy who who was in 25th with me. We were lieutenants together in 2-5 infantry. Cameron Price. He's a combat diver also, and got you know. And so when I first conceived of this event, I called Cam and I said, Cam, what do I do, man? I got this event and I don't know where to have it. I don't have any money. And he's like, just have it at my bar. I got this little place on the beach. It's called the Floribama. He's the owner of the Floribama, or one of them. And so the Floribama has become the home of the deep dive. And last year, we did it virtually because of COVID. But this year we're back live. And so we're going to do the 5K. It's for a great cause. You can join. If you register for the event, you're also going to get automatically registered to participate in the auction. So you can win some amazing prizes. You'll get a free raffle ticket, free food on the Floribama. And then the dive is a little different animal. So it's a charity dive, and we're going to auction off the seats on the boat.
Okay.
And so it's for donors. And so we're going to have a couple of combat divers, and they're going to do a ceremony under the water, and we'll take some pictures and make some memories. And, we're kind of going to aim that at the donors. But it's all for a good cause. And, with the 5K in particular, well, in the auction as well, you can do it from anywhere. You don't have to actually come down to the Floribama to participate. So there's a virtual 5K option, which my understanding, if you have like an Apple Watch or some sort of input device where you can log your miles, you can run the race. Yeah, you can upload your results and you can participate in the Deep Dive Memorial 5K from anywhere in the world. So we're really hoping that people get excited about it, that want to raise awareness about, servicemen and veteran mental health. Tip a glass to John Work, join the run with us, and maybe bid on some of the awesome prizes we're going to have.
Real quickly too, there's also some sponsorships. There's a title sponsorship that's going to be 10 grand to do, but you are the title sponsor of it. The platinum package is 1,500. The silver package is 500. Bronze is 250, and then you can do in kind. Now, if you'll explain to them a little bit what the in kind sponsorship is, because I thought that was a pretty interesting one to put on there.
Yeah, so the in kind sponsorship. So we get a lot of companies and individuals that want to donate prizes either to the raffle or the auction. And some of those things are quite valuable. So we just got a verbal pledge the other day from a company, which I won't mention tonight, but you'll see them soon on the website. They have pledged a prize to us, which is probably valued somewhere in the $1,000 range, but has in the past auctioned for $18,000. So just in order to recognize that kind of a contribution, they will get probably a platinum or a gold sponsorship level. And it comes with, different levels of advertising focus, access to certain parts, of the event, tickets to the auction, for example, and discounts on vendor booths. So we're going to have direct sales there also. So there's lots of opportunities for companies out there that want to support a good cause, but also want to, benefit from being associated with a very interesting part of the special ops community. There's opportunities for those companies to get it's a win-win situation for them.
Well, if you don't mind, I would like to go back into your career a little bit.
Yeah.
We got off on the combat, and I want to focus on that again at the end, because I want to make sure that people know what they can do to help out. So you had another story that you wrote about, and you called it Gin and Tonic. Now, this one involves a female named Delilah. I guess that's what they call her, Delilah.
I don't remember what I called her in the blog. I'd have to go back and review it. I changed all the names to protect the guilty.
So it involves, and this is one of those stories again that I read on your blog, and you don't quite understand what's going on at first. Like it almost seemed like the opening to a spy novel, the beginning of this blog, because there's this woman that comes up to you. She's trying to flirt with you. And no one really reading the article understands why she's flirting with you. She's trying to get you to help her out in this master's program that you're in.
Yep.
You point out that operationally, you have been approached by way harder women than her, and you're not falling for it.
Mm-hmm.
And not only mention that, and the only reason I mention this guy is because he'll be mentioned later on in the story. Her boyfriend is in the room watching this entire scenario take place. Now,
Yeah.
everybody needs to keep in mind that you are in the master's program, but you're in Malaysia in the master's program. And so you're in a completely fish out of water situation because this is not your pond. You're just there doing this school. And so if you can tell the story, it got crazy to me, and I couldn't believe that this stuff was going on. And I really want to focus on the plagiarism and the educational levels that you talk about in there, because that was the best part of the article to me.
Yeah, so when I write these, I don't want to write about me. I don't want to write about, hey, no shit, there I was. I mean, there's an aspect to that because I'm telling a story, but I want to write about the places that I am and the people that we encounter, and the situations that make the world interesting. And in Malaysia, I want to take you back to 2007 when this story was, took place. In 2007, the United States was George Bush was president. We were hot and heavy in the war on terror, and Malaysia is a sort of uncomfortable Muslim nation. And what I mean by that is Malaysia is a multicultural kind of construct, and it has been since way back in its history. And in order to make it work as a peaceful democracy, they've had to very carefully define their society based on race, religion, and culture. Okay, and so they're very protective of a Muslim identity because the Muslims politically are the largest group. They are the ones with the political power by design. So they emerged from a sort of colonial context and as a Muslim led politically Muslim led kind of place. It's a wonderful country. It's a great place, but they're very focused on that. And so religion takes on a daily sort of sensitivity. And so there I was, and Malaysia also is a place where the British Commonwealth existed and still exists for a long period of time. I mean, it was a bastion in the East for the British Empire. And so what you have in Malaysia is this very multicultural society that's very sensitive about itself. And you've got people in our master's class, we had people from Africa, we had people from the Middle East, we had the whole Muslim world was there, we had most of the East Asian world was there. So we had students from China, from South Asia, from Palestine, from Iran, from Africa. And then there was me. I was like the lone American guy. We had a Korean guy there as well. And so it was just a really fascinating place to study international relations and politics because everybody was coming at these concepts from a different angle. And people would say things, and I'm like, man, I never thought of that. And there was a lot of, man, you're crazy. But at the same time, there was a lot more of, man, I never really thought of things that way. And so I described the situation that way because it becomes important. So we had this girl in the class, a Muslim lady, Malay lady named, I think I called her Delilah in the story. It's not a real name. And I had a meeting with a very senior official in the Ministry of Defense in the afternoon because I was doing some research for a paper I was writing. And I asked some of the folks at the embassy to get me a meeting with this gentleman. And so I showed up in class wearing a suit because I had come straight from my meeting with this Undersecretary of Defense. And at that point, Delilah, who was a little bit promiscuous, kind of, I guess it drew her attention. She came, she was flirting with me or whatever, and I just kind of ignored her. Well, what I came to learn about her later was that she was very adept at having boyfriends that would help her do her homework. And so we had a group presentation that was due in the class. And it was just a function of we just didn't have enough time in the semester for everybody to do individual research presentations to this seminar of grad students. So we kind of teamed up in groups of 2 or 3. And that was kind of a fascinating thing because everybody was was a lot of plagiarism, and you could see the different groups and where their, the state of their education system was based on their group work.
Well, can we talk about that for a minute? Because you
Yeah,
point out in there that there would get to points in the plagiarism that if someone didn't show up with their part of the article or their whatever they plagiarized from the internet, they just skip that part of the speech.
All right. So in the U.S. system, and there's a cultural aspect to this. If you're in a group of 3 students and you've got a task to work on together, and one of the guys doesn't show up, what does he do? He's something happened. He's going to call you ahead of time. Says, look, sorry, something happened. I'll try to make it up to you. I'll do the work tomorrow, or I'll cram, burn the midnight oil, and I'll do my part, and I'll get you. It's suboptimal, but I'll try to get my part done. Well, in a lot of these cultures, it doesn't really work that way. So what I found oftentimes is, some guy in the group would have something come up, and it was usually a family related thing. And instead of calling and telling his group members, hey, listen, we have to make adjustments to how we're going to accomplish the task here, they just wouldn't show up. They wouldn't call. You wouldn't know what happened. They wouldn't answer the phone. And it was like, instead of getting angry about it, the group would just sort of go, oh, well, guess he's not coming. And for me as an American, that was frustrating as heck, because I was like, what? This guy has a responsibility to the group here, and he's just kind of skipping out on it. You don't do that.
Right.
But in those cultures, you kind of do. And you sort of, the rest of the group is sort of expected to just pretend it didn't happen and not talk about it, and find another way to get to, the objective somehow. Well, when this would happen at the last minute, you'd see these groups with 2 or 3 guys, and one of them wouldn't show up, and they'd be standing there with their presentation wondering where their buddy was. And since they plagiarized it from Wikipedia, in most cases, they would start reading halfway through the article. They'd read Wikipedia. Their English wasn't that great in some cases, and so their research abilities were kind of limited. All the coursework was in English for lots of complex reasons, but it was sort of comical to see a very nervous group of 2 or 3 students stand there and start reading a Wikipedia article from like page 3, and pass that off as useful grad work. And it was, for me, it was comical and frustrating all at the same time. But anyway, that Delilah, whatever her name was, Delilah was in sort of an extreme case of that. So she showed up to do a presentation, and I think it was a one-person presentation that night. The classes were all at night because the Strategic and Defense Studies program that we were in was designed to accommodate working Malaysian professionals, so policemen and military officers specifically. So all the classes were at night to accommodate those guys. And so it's, just to set the scene for you here, it's dark out. We're in a mostly deserted university, and it's certainly a deserted building. We were the only ones having class at 7 o'clock at night. And Delilah's up there giving her presentation. Well, it was pretty obvious to everybody sitting in the room that she was having some pretty extreme stress about it and wasn't able to give her presentation. And so, we all kind of sat there patiently while she shuffled the papers, and she sort of looked at the instructor who was at his desk kind of next to this podium that we'd set up. And then, she'd look at us, and she'd look at the papers and look at the instructor, and it just kind of went like this in this awkward, really increasingly tense situation where this poor woman is now just sweating, and her lips began to tremble, and she was clearly not able to give her present. She hadn't done her homework. And I'm sitting there in the front row thinking to myself, like, we're wasting our time with this girl. She didn't do her homework. Good God. And what I found out later was that she had all of her homework and her assignments up to this point done for her by one of her boyfriends. So this is where the flirting became kind of an operational thing for her. So she was cultivating multiple boyfriends in order to get whatever she wanted in life. And in this case, it was a PhD student to do her homework. And then this guy had cut her off apparently the night before and didn't do her homework and broke up with her. So there she is in front of our class, stressing out about how to give a presentation about, I don't know, the United Nations Security Council or something, like that. And she couldn't do it. And the stress just ramped up. And there we are sitting there in this class. And you can imagine it's hot.
Well, how long are we talking? How long is she standing there looking at you and the instructor?
Oh my gosh, man. It seemed like fucking forever, DJ, but it was probably 5 minutes or so. And I mean, if you have to imagine having stage fright for 5 minutes, you're standing in front of a group of your peers. It's got to be like an eternity. So she sat there for, I don't know how many minutes, hemming and hawing about this thing and not saying a word. And finally, I think something broke or she needed a way out or whatever. And there was a small window on the wall next to the podium. Again, it's dark out, so you can kind of see your reflection in the glass. And she gazes at this window and she looks at it and at a certain point, she just dropped everything. I mean, papers went flying and she started clutching at her eyes. And I mean, like really gouging at her eyes and screaming. And she is, I mean, and I'm not kidding. And she falls down on throws herself on the floor in front of all of us. She's gouging at her eyes. She's screaming in Malay, takut, takut, which means I'm terrified or I'm scared. And she's writhing on the floor. And I mean, this is hysteria. I guess I've never seen anything like it, not in an adult human. And I was in the front row and I remember kicking my desk back because we were in those like desk chairs with the arm desk thing. And I sat there like this with her writhing around at my feet, like, oh my God, what's going on here? And the class was stunned, myself included. We were all just kind of like, what the hell? The instructor is sitting there. I think he actually ran out of the room at one point, but we were stunned. And the one who broke the sort of tension or made movement happen was one of our classmates named Mahmoud. Now, Mahmoud is an interesting character. Mahmoud was the brother-in-law or the cousin of a gentleman named Salam Fayyad, who was the Palestinian prime minister at one point. I don't think he was at that time. But he's an important Palestinian politician. And Mahmoud had grown up as the relative of this important Palestinian gentleman. And he was tall, dark-skinned, good-looking guy, charismatic as all get out, great, a natural kind of leader. People were drawn to him. Big old beard, religious guy, which in a Palestinian is a little strange. But very muscular. He had been a bodybuilding champion when he went to school in Egypt. I mean, I'm painting the picture here because this Mahmoud was just this, gosh, if he was American, people would be like, yeah, Captain America, right?
Right.
Follow me kind of guy. And Mahmoud jumps up and runs to the front of the class and he declares, I have seen this. I saw this all the time in Egypt. The jinn, and that's DJINN. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, it means a ghost or a genie. The jinns would take over people's body in Egypt all the time. Don't worry, I know how to handle this. And he just immediately just dives into prayer. And he's standing in front of the room and he starts this prayer over the writhing, still screaming, clutching her eyeball. I think she's doing damage. Delilah,
I think at a point you wrote in there that she started really getting at her face, like tearing it up.
She was really into it. And and so there's Mahmoud praying, and so and all the Malaysians really kind of there's an affinity for the Palestinians in Malaysian society, particularly Malay society, which is the Muslim part of the Malaysian community. And they're put on a pedestal in a way because they fight the Israelis. And that's a simplistic way of looking at it, but that's very much how a lot of Malaysians view the Palestinians. They are out there taking one for the team for the Muslim world. And so there was a desire and a natural kind of followership associated with Mahmoud. Apart from his own personal charisma, he had that as well. And so, I mean, the entire classroom or at least the Malay Muslims jumped up and joined him in prayer. And there I am with this, sitting in the front row still, with this girl writhing at our feet, tearing her eyeballs out of her head. Most of my Muslim classmates deep in prayer, humana, 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 humana,
I don't think it's.
And well, no, but I don't know the Arabic, so they've got their hands like this, and they're praying, and they're hoping to help, Delilah with her issue. And meanwhile, one of her boyfriends, who's actually her fiance, a young kid named Zul's terrified. He's running back and forth in the class, going, what do I do? What do I do? And he'd stop and he would pray, and then we would run around like, a chicken with his head cut off. And finally I realized, like, something has to happen. We got to get her out of here. And I slapped the table and I said, Zul, get her out of here. And he looks at me and he said, right. I'll get her out of here. And he breaks through the crowd of praying, classmates, and he scoops his lover up in his arms, and he begins again running back and forth, not really knowing what to do. And I slapped the table again and I said, Zul, that way. And I pointed at the door. And he said, right. And he runs out the door with her as fast as he can go, so fast that he smacked her head on this door frame as he went out into the hallway. And you could hear her screaming all the way down the hallway as they exited the building. And then, we kind of all sort of decompressed. And there was Mahmoud telling stories about jinns in Egypt. And now that's all funny.
There has to be a point during this where you're looking around going, what in the fuck did I get into?
Yeah, well, the teacher came back into the classroom, the professor, and he had literally left the room, just ran away when she started freaking out. And he comes back in, he said, I don't actually know, other than maybe he was scared. It was pretty intense, I got to say, DJ. I mean, she was really possessed by whatever. And so he comes back in the room and without any discussion whatsoever just says, look, class is canceled, go home, get out of here. And I was like, come on, we could continue. And he's like, no, get the fuck out. So we like left, and I turned to some of my friends who I would drink beer with, the Korean and the Iranian guy, and one of the Malays. Hey guys, let's go drink beer. And so we went, we had some beer and we talked about it and laughed. Well, it happened again. A week or so later, she came back for round 2 and tried to do it again, and again got possessed by the devil. And her story was that she had been taken over by the devil because there was a portal to hell in the ladies' bathroom in this building that we were studying in. This is an important detail because it was a problem for the university. And what I had a little bit of trouble kind of dealing with as an American was the university accommodated this nonsense. I mean, it's clear to me and probably everybody else in the room that Dorina didn't do her homework, or Delilah. She didn't do her homework. And I was like, what? Screw her, man. Fuck her. She didn't do her homework. But the school was like, no, we are going to leave this building. There's apparently a gateway to hell in the ladies' bathroom. So, and they didn't say that, but we're like, we're going to have class in this other building, nearby. And so we had to go in this other building. And I was like, well, why the fuck are we indulging this bullshit so that, she can try again and not get possessed by the devil during, because she didn't do her homework. But what I came to realize is that the concern for the university was not that there was actually a portal to hell in the ladies' bathroom, but that hysteria spreads. And they have a word for it in Malay. It's called mangamuk, running amok. And so when you open the paper in a Malaysian newspaper, just about once a week, you're going to read a story about a group of students, young people, almost always Malay women, mangamuk, for some reason. And they have to, it spreads like a disease. And so if they don't nip it in the bud, they end up with they risked having the entire undergrad population hear about it and start running amok and having hysteria and boycotting classes in that building. And you can imagine the larger problem that they could have had. And then, that could spread to, well, the University of Malaya is, got a gateway to hell. Don't send your kids there to go to school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a real world problem for them. And it's something that took me a while to appreciate. But it was, and it all started because this girl didn't do her homework and got cut off by her boyfriend. And so understanding that cultural context was kind of important. Now, the sort of punchline to all of this stuff is she was Muslim from a respectable family, but there's still very much an aspect of traditional religion in Malay society in Malaysia. And so the family hired a bomo, which is essentially a witch doctor. And the bomo, it's traditional magic medicine or whatever, and they hired the bomo to do a ceremony to get the demon out of Delilah. So they invited all of her friends and classmates and whatever. I got invited. I didn't go because I was like, I don't want anything to do with this. This girl's toxic. I'm just staying clear. But several of my classmates went. Zul was there, her fiance.
Well, he kind of has to be there. He's the fiance.
He has to be there. But what I started to figure out was that she actually had, by my count, 3 of her boyfriends in the room at the Bomo ceremony. And they kind of all realized it at that time. And so one of them, who was a friend of mine, and I had warned him to just stay away from her. He didn't take my advice. And he went to the Bomo ceremony and he was telling me, he's like, Lino, I think she's got several boyfriends. This guy was there and that guy was there. And, there was some, I could tell. I was like, well, I told you, man. I told you. But it was a really fascinating kind of thing. And
all I think about is that scene in Ghostbusters where she's floating above her bed and he tells her, just stay here. I'll be right back. And they have to find Gozar and all that. It just seems insane to me. And I guess it's what you say about the cultural differences. If someone did that in the United States, you would be like,
we'd all be like, you're full of
are
shit.
you insane?
Yeah. All the other students would be like, what an idiot.
Right.
Didn't do her homework. She's full of shit. Convenient excuse. Nobody would take it seriously. No school would have to deal with closing off a building for a period of time until everybody forgot about it. But in Malaysia, it was a serious concern, and not a frivolous one. I'm not saying this to criticize the administration at the university.
No, I think they
actually, I think they actually made some pretty smart moves in response to this.
You should have told him, no. That portal to hell was in the toilet that I was just in. That's what seemed the funniest to me, that they picked the bathroom. I'm like, well, I mean, I guess that's a good a place as any to make a portal to hell. So
I suppose, but I made the point too, like that we had a blind gentleman in our class, and I used to have to take him to the bathroom. Like I just helped him because he couldn't navigate the stairs and all that stuff safely. And so it was right next to the ladies' room. And I was like, well, come on now. If there's a portal to hell in the ladies' room, you're telling me the devil didn't come out in the men's room too? Like, come on. But making strict commonsensical scientific logic in that case is not really what was called for. What was called for was understanding the society, which is, a certain segment of that community is susceptible to what they call hysteria, and it will shut down facilities and does so on a routine basis.
I think that's the best story of the ones that you wrote that I enjoyed. That was my favorite one. Just like when you got to the point where they just started shutting down parts of the college, I'm like, I cannot believe this. This is to get out of a grade. Like, I don't know. So in all of your work, Lino, you have done consulting too. And that's the last story I want to talk about tonight. Now, everybody knows Aruba is kind of a crazy place to be. We've had Natalie Holloway go there and disappear. We've had other Americans disappear. It's just kind of if I could say, like a Bermuda Triangle there. People go there, disappear. There's no leads on them. While I was researching this story, I saw that there's a recent one that just happened again of another person. you were called in to figure out what was going on. Now, yours wasn't a disappearance. Yours was someone that was over there. There was drugs, alcohol involved. The police were involved. There was a police shooting involved. But from what I understood, it goes back to this person believing that they were actually drugged there to kind of start
Mm-hmm.
off the story. And the basis behind that was this person was going to be drugged, maybe sold into human trafficking. And you call it Operation Redbird. And so
Yep.
I want to talk about this story because you seem very, very heartfelt in this story. And there's a lot of, it's very multifaceted, but if we can talk about it, I want you to kind of set it up because I don't think I'll do it justice setting it up.
Yeah. We called it Redbird because Redbird was the code name that we gave to the victim that I was going over there to sort of help. And her name is Cody Shakir. And by all kind of measures, I've never met Cody in person actually, but by all measures, she was a really caring and conscientious and a good person, a good citizen, a good person, and was down there enjoying a vacation in Aruba with a friend of hers. And something bad happened, and she got into the trouble that you started to describe. But before I tell the story about Cody, we kind of have to understand a little bit about the history of Aruba. Aruba is an interesting place because it is not entirely a sovereign country. So it is part of it is a limited part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and I've not used the correct term there, but the Kingdom of the Netherlands does the foreign policy for Aruba and administers the justice system, certain parts of the justice system, particularly the criminal justice aspects of it. And so Aruba had changed. It was originally a Spanish settlement, and then it became part of the Netherlands Antilles and was part of the Netherlands until 1986 when they decided to secede. But before that process was complete, they said, okay, we don't actually want to secede completely. Please continue to run our foreign and defense policy and our judicial system and whatever. But it's gone through a few phases in its history. So there was a gold rush that never panned out. There was a refinery that opened and subsequently closed. But then tourism became the main attraction in the late 20th century. And as a result, so the United States doesn't have a presence in Aruba. There's no embassy, no consulate. In fact, the consular affairs of the United States are handled from a consulate in Curacao, which has a similar status within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And the embassy, I believe, is in Barbados. But anyway, so you start to see that working with the government in Aruba can be somewhat bewildering if you're not prepared for that sort of thing. And one day in February of this year, I want to say very late February, I got a call from a trusted friend of mine named Mario. Mario is one of the principals at a company called Seven Arrows LLC. And Seven Arrows is a company that does a lot of special risk investigations and risk consulting, mostly in Latin America, because the two principals, Joe and Mario, have a lot of experience there. Both SF guys. So I know them from the SF land. And, I've been friends with Mario since we were civilians. He was at EPA, I was at USAID, and we used to drink together because our offices were close. But anyway, we've become friends and business associates. And so got a call from Seven Arrows one day, and Mario said, "Hey, Lino, do you know anybody in Aruba?" And I said, "Well, and I should back up, I guess, because I own a consultancy called Navisio Global. So the Combat Diver Foundation is not my only gig. Navisio Global is my for-profit arm. And Navisio Global is really just a way to mobilize my resume and my contact list, which is extensive. So I know people all over the world, and I can bring them to bear to solve problems for clients. We're not talking about gunslinging. We don't do that. by virtue of the assignments that I've had and the experiences I've had around the world, I know a lot of people with a lot of international savvy, former diplomats and military officers, and people for whom a passport is really a necessity, and know how to operate and influence in certain parts of the world. So Mario called me and said, "Hey, do you know anybody in Aruba? We've got a problem there, and we don't know anybody." And I said, "Well, I think I know how to get to somebody." And so I called a colleague of mine who was originally a client, but has become a mentor and a friend, a Canadian gentleman who plays at a very, very high level, a longtime political and international operator that we'll call Silverback. And I called Silverback and I said, "Hey, his name's Paul." I said, "Hey, Paul, you know anybody in Aruba?" He said, "Yeah, I know a former prime minister from the Dutch Antilles that, you know, has joined the opposition. He's kind of, out of work and he just does stuff. It's expensive, but, he could help you." And I said, "Well, we might have to warm him up because we've got the situation." And the situation was Cody Shakur. So here's the story with Cody. So just to set all that up, here's the story with Cody. Cody was down there on a vacation, young girl, 25 years old. Again, by all measures, an upstanding citizen enjoying a vacation in Aruba with her best friend. And they, one night, met some local gentlemen on the beach, local kids. And they drank some beer and they smoked a joint or whatever. And at a certain point, they said, "Okay, we're hungry. We need to go eat. Can you local guys show us? We want to eat sushi." And so the local guy got on his bike and the girls got in their car, and he led them to a place where they could get the food they were looking for. And at some point, Cody, who was behind the wheel, perceived a threat. And there's some justification in that. I actually went to the site and I read his statement and her statement, and it's a pretty restrictive roadway, and kind of the way he kind of blocked the path so that she would enter the parking garage that was appropriate for that place might have seemed like he was trying to block her path. And according to her statement, some cars came up behind anyway. So she's in this place where she feels restricted and constrained, and she's feeling funny. She believes that this gentleman has put something in either the alcohol they were drinking or the joint they were smoking. And she freaks out and she runs. She manages to escape this constricted alleyway and went on what can only be described as a rampage with her car. She was trying to escape. She was terrified, and maybe under the influence of various drugs. We're not sure about that. The toxicology report didn't reveal anything, but at a minimum, she had smoked some marijuana and had some beer. And according to her statement, she was looking for the airport, as if she was going to get on a flight and go home, in the middle of the night. But she ran, and navigation wasn't happening as she was trying to evade this person that she thought was still chasing her because there were cars behind her. Her friend demanded to be let out of the car, and so she was dropped off at a certain point, and Cody continued alone. And the long story short there is that she ended up traveling at a high rate of speed, recklessly, under the influence, across the island, and came back. At a certain point, the police got involved in a pursuit, because you have this person putting other motorists at danger. There had been complaints that she had hit other cars and even properties. So it was a dangerous situation. She wasn't responding to the instructions of the cops who got behind her on the chase. And this ended up with her arrest. And they actually had, at a certain point, used deadly force, and they shot her. They shot her 3 times. And so that's the story that I was told on my way to Aruba on a contract with 7 Arrows. So 7 Arrows hired me to go to Aruba to try to figure out what happened there and hopefully get some relief for the family. Now here's where I'll stop that part of the story and tell you about Cody's family. So the only person in Aruba for Cody was her brother Khalid. Young guy, about 28, but not an experienced individual, not in the international context. And the family has some money. They're car dealers, used car dealers from the Philadelphia area, but they're not rich. These aren't the kind of people that have, special risk insurance policies that could cover a Green Beret investigative team to go out there and kind of help out with the situation. They just don't. So the principal at Seven Arrows, Joe, offered them a really good deal and said, listen, we'll go down there. We'll send, an expert down to kind of help with the situation. We have a team that will do some intelligence analysis or information analysis to help understand the situation. We'll have our men on the ground working with all the stakeholders that are involved in this thing to help us understand the situation so that we can make decisions and hopefully get Cody out of jail. That was the task we had. And so Seven Arrows called me because I had the connections, and then I was also available, so I went forward to Aruba to deal with it. I didn't know what I was getting into. Before I left, I actually lost quite a bit of sleep that night because, Cody had at a certain point believed or made a statement that she believed the cops were in on it. That she was potentially in danger of being kidnapped by these individuals, and that she thought they were in cahoots with the cops because she believed she saw some of them talking to the cops that eventually joined the chase against her. There's no evidence for that, but that's what she believed. So this is the information I had, and most of this was coming from her young, inexperienced brother Khalid, who was, in a hotel room spinning himself up. He didn't know what to do. The family, the uncle Waleed had actually gone to Aruba in the early days and hired a lawyer to help represent Cody, but that's all he did. And he left Khalid there. Khalid stayed out of a sense of responsibility for his younger sister, but didn't really know how to handle the situation. He wasn't paying the lawyer's bills. He didn't have a relationship with a lawyer. He didn't know how to deal with that situation. But he was our only source of information about what was happening. So we didn't know. We didn't know if we were going to be stepping on the agenda of an international kidnapping ring or some drug dealers or dirty cops. I had no idea what the threat situation was going to look like. So I took some measures to protect myself and to protect Khalid when I arrived, and none of those ended up being necessary. But it was prudent to do that. And when I arrived, we had a lot of invalid assumptions about the lawyer. He wasn't responsive to Khalid because Khalid wasn't paying his bills. The lawyer is actually representing Cody, not the family. And so Khalid believed that he wasn't operating in the best interest of his sister. And that was the impression that he gave to us before I showed up on the ground. So this is the information environment we were dealing with. So my first order of business was to get there and to meet the lawyer, and I believe to sort him out. And if you've, he's an Aruban gentleman, but culturally Dutch. If you've ever dealt with the Dutch, my experience with them is they know what they're doing. They value institutions and rules, and they're very good about playing within those parameters. And they are not very, they don't waste a lot of time on trying to be amiable. So when you show up in a business situation with a Dutch person, you have to prove yourself to them. That's been my experience when I was at NATO, and working in that context. And so when I met Chris, who was the lawyer, that's what I encountered. And it's usually a situation where it doesn't go well the first time. But if you find a way to work with these folks, they can be fantastic. And that was the case with Chris.
I'd like to go back for just a second, Lino. When you said that you arrived on the ground and you did some things, because I thought this was pretty interesting. You did some things to kind of secure you being there and letting people know who you were and probably that you should not be bothered. So can we go into that a little bit?
Yeah, again, I didn't know if I was going to be stepping on somebody's agenda, and particularly somebody dangerous. Like I didn't know if there were criminal elements involved in what happened to Cody, if there were bad cops. I just had no idea. So one, I wanted to see if we had any surveillance. And I took certain measures when I got to the airport and moved to the hotel with Khalid, who picked me up, to make sure that I could identify if we were being followed or surveilled. I didn't detect anything. Now, that doesn't mean that we weren't. One time, they might, you might not notice them. But it was interesting to me that.
You also had
Mhm.
dinner with someone, correct?
Yeah, so I also called through some contacts that I have with the Combat Diver Foundation. I called the commander at the Marine Barracks down there, and he's probably not happy that I'm saying this on TV, but I invited him to dinner. And I actually made the mistake of telling him I wanted to discuss the case with him, which is not really, they wouldn't have been interested in that. And in fact, they told me that. They said, look, that's an American problem. We don't want to deal with it. The Dutch Marines are there to protect the sovereignty of Aruba, but we don't get involved in what happens, and especially not with Americans. So I said, look, forget it, forget the case. I just want to have dinner with you as a combat diver, fellow combat diver. Let's just get together, and I want to meet you. And my intent there was I wanted everybody to see me having dinner with the commander of the Dutch Marine Barracks. In the event that somebody dangerous wanted to thwart what I was doing, they would think twice. Yeah. Now that dinner ended up not happening, but also the threat was non-existent.
Okay.
And that's something that took me a day or two to sort of come to terms with, because again, I didn't know the situation I was walking into when I went down there, and I just had to be careful about it. That said, my first order of business that night was to meet the lawyer. And again, our assumptions going into that meeting were that he wasn't responsive, that he wasn't operating in the best interest of Cody, that he might have been on just trying to, shill money from the family. Now, what's interesting about that is Waleed, the uncle, and Khaldoon, the father, were paying this lawyer, but wanted absolutely nothing to do with us. They wanted nothing to do with me or Seven Arrows. And they really didn't want.
Yeah.
They really didn't want anything to do with Khalid either. And that was a source of frustration, because we were trying to make decisions about how to approach the lawyer in the situation, and the guys paying the bills were not willing to talk to us. And what Khalid explained to me, and what I came to understand, was you have to kind of go back to the history of Khaldoon and Waleed. The uncle and the father they're Iraqis. And they migrated to the United States at some point, I believe, around the time of the Iran-Iraq War, from southern Iraq, which, if you recall, was the scene of most of the fighting between the Iranians and the Iraqis in what was it, 79, 80. It's bad place to hang out in that period of time.
Right.
So these guys had been car salesmen in Iraq. And by whatever mechanism, they migrated to the United States. And, if you're a car salesman, in Iraq, you're going to try your hand at car sales in the United States. Why not? It makes sense.
I got to think it's going to be way more profitable here.
I would think so. It's certainly cleaner.
Right.
And so these guys set up shop, and they were successful. Khaldoon owns a business in Philly, and Waleed in somewhere in the Chicago area. And they're successful, upper middle class folks. They've done well for themselves as immigrants, but they've taken also some of the cultural practices with them, and they were not in any way willing to consider the opinions or the advice of Khalid. Now, Khalid was the one that actually hired Seven Arrows. And there's a funny story about how that all came about. So a good friend of Khalid's from boyhood works for a large open source kind of intelligence firm that does government contracts for the United States government. mostly. They do corporate stuff too, but they do a lot of open source intelligence analysis for the U.S. And so when this thing went down with Cody, Khalid's friend, who's, by nature of his work is a little bit more savvy about how things work. And he reached out to one of his work colleagues and said, look, my friend Cody is in this bad situation in Aruba. What do I do? Well, the friend led them to a large security firm called Allied Universal, which does a lot of special risk cases around the world. It's one of the major corporations that gets involved in that sort of thing. They wouldn't touch it, probably because the Shakir family didn't have a policy with them, nor did they really have the resources to deal with the situation. But they referred it to one of their known colleagues, and that was the principal at Seven Arrows, Joe. They didn't have any contacts in Aruba, so Joe talked to Mario. Mario said, Lino knows everybody, so let's call Lino, and that's how I ended up in Aruba. Long story short of that, though, is that Khalid hired us. This is Cody's brother. But Waleed and Khaldoon, the uncle and the father, didn't approve of any decisions made by Khalid to bring other people in. And on top of that, Khaldoon is estranged from his wife Kim, and they're going through some hard times. And so what we walked into as the Seven Arrows team, we walked into a situation where we had a divided family. So even the family couldn't decide how to deal with this situation. And what happens a lot with families under stress is they just start reaching out to anyone or anything that seems to offer hope. And so we were dealing with this rotating sort of cast of characters that were receiving money or had been friends or colleagues with Khaldoon and Waleed, excuse me. A lawyer in Philly, a prosecutor in Guatemala, another lawyer, a competing lawyer in Aruba that they hired at a certain point. But never at any point did they want to talk to the guy on the ground, me, or the folks that were supporting me with that Seven Arrows, who were, working with Khalid and Kim, Cody's mother. It was a very difficult situation, and I, being the guy on the ground, I stayed away from the family, and I let the graybeards from Seven Arrows handle that situation. And Mario actually went up and spent some time up there in New Jersey with the family to help them kind of absorb what I was doing and understand where we were going with all this and how we were going to help Cody. My efforts really focused on Chris, the Aruban lawyer, and his ability to access bits of the government and other stakeholders in Aruba. So Chris, once he and I kind of got through that initial kind of I'm a Dutch guy and I'm going to fight with you kind of interaction that we had, right. He and I started very carefully coordinating with each other for Cody's benefit. Now that turned into a very functional relationship, and Chris and I have become sort of friends of a kind since then. I have a lot of regard for him, and he's a good lawyer. He actually worked on the Natalie Holloway case. But Chris got me access to the owners of the car and their lawyers and insurance people. He got me access to the Cody's car. We found the police car. We went and saw that. And I essentially conducted what a military person would recognize as a use of force investigation. The cops got into this pursuit. They stopped Cody at multiple points during the pursuit, and at multiple points they shot her. So there was the long and short of it is their story didn't match each other. And it didn't match the evidence on the ground that I was collecting. And so while I didn't discover any evidence that they had criminal intent. In other words, they were not, as far as I could tell, operating as some sort of criminal capacity to exploit tourists, or Cody in particular. I do think that they could be criticized for their decisions on the use of force.
So here's the point, and you and I kind of went back and forth talking today about this.
Mm-hmm.
Here's where I start to have problems with the story and stuff on the ground. Like you say that
Sure.
their stories don't match up. So
Mm-hmm.
the person that's in the car with her, what does she say about the whole thing?
That's funny. She refused to make any statements to the Arubans. She managed to get out of the country before any of the police activity took place. Well, any of the investigative activity took place. So um, she was let out of the car in the middle of the night somewhere at a gas station, made her way back to the hotel, packed her shit, and got the next thing smoking out of Aruba. So before the Aruban cops could investigate, could ask her any serious questions, I think she made a statement, which basically said, you know, these guys tried to stop us. Cody ran, and I jumped out of the car. Um, she's back in the United States, and
Has
so in
any
order to
has anybody talked to her here?
my understanding is that the Aruban government, through the Dutch, and this is where things get complicated, and we have to go back to the history of Aruba, is through the Dutch, they have to request a law enforcement agency in the United States to get access to this other person. Her name's Sarah. So it's a long roundabout process just to interview this person who jumped out of the car before the police even joined the chase. So there's not a lot of information she's likely to be able to provide except for what prompted all of this to start with. And it's actually a source of frustration for us in the family because it's like you claim to be Cody's friend, and what you've done is basically abandon her. And that was the attitude that we had about her.
And that's I feel almost like that's the piece of the puzzle that needs to be put in there because she's the only one other than Cody that can say what happened because if you look at it from an outsider's point of view, you're just looking in on
Mm-hmm.
it. You have to understand that there's parts of it that just seem, I don't know if the word's crazy, but there's parts of the story that just don't make sense. No matter how hard you try and put those puzzle pieces together,
Yeah.
they don't come together.
I've had that conversation with Chris, the lawyer, quite a bit. We're trying to determine, why did Cody run? Why did she,
Exactly.
embark on this thing to start with? Because they had been socializing with this kid. And there was another man at a certain point that had come into the picture, but he wasn't directly involved in her decision to run. So we said, why did she have this perception that she was being threatened, that caused her to take off in her car, dump her girlfriend in God knows where, and then run to the point where she got shot by the cops 3 times. That's an open question, and we know that she had some alcohol. We know that she had some marijuana. She claims she believes that she had been drugged in some other way by these gentlemen. I can't find anything in her statement or the construction of the events, his statement, because they took a statement from the kid. I couldn't find at any point where it made sense that he would have been able to do that.
I
So
mean,
there's an
you said
open.
he's on a bike, right?
Yeah, he was on a bike, a motorcycle. Yeah,
Yeah.
a scooter. Yeah,
And so that's where,
they
and
had been smoking at the beach, and
right,
then
right.
yeah,
My whole thing is that, and I get it where it could be frustrating, where you're trying to deal with different levels of force, different force continuums, different government entities, and how you connect with those. There's just parts of the story, and I told you this when we were talking that I'm looking at it, and it just, I feel like everywhere that could help, that person has gone away, won't make a statement,
yeah.
or that puzzle piece doesn't fit in there.
Here's where I think our efforts really won the day, DJ. Is that so? After I was with Khalid for approximately a week before he finally said I have to go back to my life, and he left me there alone for a few days, which was kind of a relief because the family's emotional.
Right.
They see conspiracies behind every bush, and I wasn't seeing the evidence for a lot of that, frankly. What I was seeing was potentially a under pressure, questionable decision about the use of force, but I wasn't seeing a criminal conspiracy.
Well,
Um,
and that's what you were hired for, was to look at the use of force.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Um, so I was finally, I had some time by myself to go, and what I did is I retraced the steps of Cody's flight, um, from the initial point where she started running to the point where she was actually arrested. And as I mentioned, she had traveled all the way to the southeast corner of
right.
the island, the extreme of the island, and started to come back. And about halfway back, she was finally arrested. But she'd been stopped a couple of times along the way, and in fact, shot a couple times along the way. So she continued to flee after being shot. Um, where was I going with that? So where we really won the day was I went and talked to people along that route. I said, "Hey, listen, a couple of weeks ago there was a gal that was running from the cops. She got shot. You would have heard the shots from here. Were you around?" I started interviewing folks, and in particular, there was a point where she was finally arrested was in front of a house on an intersection on this main road. Nice house in a decent neighborhood. And I decided to go and talk to the people that lived there. And at first, they were a little standoffish. At least the gentleman was. But as I was walking away from the house, the lady came out and said, "Listen, can we talk?" I saw the whole thing. She said, "I saw the whole thing. He shot her down there, and he shot her again here. And she was quite upset about the way the cops treated Cody." Now that's neither here nor there because she only saw the end of this trail. But what was apparent to me was, with the evidence that I was able to collect, I could tell very definitively what had happened and where that car had gone. And what was interesting about it was she had lost the right front tire on the car.
Which
And
leaves
so she left a trail
right.
of exactly where she traveled, and it invalidated the story told by the cops about how, where, and why they dropped the hammer on her. Now, we could make an argument, and I'll spare you the details, but we could make an argument that the cop was under pressure, there was confusion, there was fear, and I'm sympathetic to that. But they charged her with attempted manslaughter. And it's not apparent to me, based on all of that she tried to kill these cops with her car. And so that's the investigation that I conducted. We found the witnesses that were able to basically, corroborate my investigation. And within a couple of weeks of me leaving Aruba, the prosecutor saw it the same way and actually let her go home. So
there's one more thing that I want to talk about. At the end of this, when it all comes in front of this house, the arrest ends. Cody is still very combative. As it's over. So here's what I'm trying to understand. If the manslaughter thing wasn't proven or anything like that, what you were there to do, I'm not. This is one of those puzzle pieces again that doesn't make sense to me. If she's just out there just trying to get away, this is all ended. Everything has been going on. She's still combative.
Yeah.
Any reason why? Did she say why, or did she say? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
She didn't specifically say, but she was terrified. She believed the cops were trying to kill her. And at that point, she'd been shot 3 times. And so there was a little bit of possibly justification for her attitude. But yeah, she resisted. You could see her still fighting. She's quite combative at the end there. And there's a video that was on the news with that. And so my thoughts are this girl has, it's hard to explain how you can be shot 3 times. Her injuries were quite significant, by the way.
Yeah, I think I wrote them down.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, she was shot. Okay, so she was shot through the shoulder,
Right.
the right shoulder.
She took one in the ear from
She took
behind,
one through the ear, which was not serious. It just went through this part of her ear, and then she was shot through the throat.
but it missed
And
everything. It went through and through, right?
yeah, it was kind of a miracle. So she took it around right here. It exited right there, and it exited out the side of the car. Which, by the way, the cops never reported shooting her from the side of the vehicle, which is one of the things that we kind of focused on. And she actually testified that they shot her while they were moving. So they fired at her from a moving vehicle while they were alongside her. And then they shot her again the first time they stopped her from the back. And this is where the officer claimed that she tried to run him over with her car. Um, he claimed to have been shooting at the front of the vehicle. The evidence shows that that's almost certainly impossible. That he shot her from the back. All the bullets went from the back. And then they arrested her at a third location where he shot her. He shot her again at the third location.
And so it was interesting to me to kind of wrap this whole story up. It was interesting to me that you told me, it's down to, you don't think there was criminal intent on the cop's part. You don't believe that there was manslaughter on her part. There's going to be maybe administrative duties in one, maybe smaller criminal prosecution on the other. And this is all just going to kind of wrap up, and Aruba is going to be a place that you just take vacation at still.
Yeah, look, the Arubans are very sensitive to tourists having trouble there, this kind of trouble. And that's bad for Aruba. Tourism is their major industry, especially from the United States. And, after the Natalie Holloway case, it's going to be a very sensitive issue when a girl, especially a good girl like Cody, gets in that kind of trouble in Aruba. I think it's going to be very hard for Cody to avoid all the charges completely. But the attempted manslaughter charge against her is not sustainable. And my investigation, I think, made that unsustainable. Certainly, the information that we leaked to the press, and I did some analysis and drew some diagrams that ended up in the Aruban press, put a lot of pressure on the police to clean their story up. And I don't say clean their story up because they were trying to be false about it. I just think it's a complex situation, adrenaline, nighttime fear. You add all those things up and stories aren't clean. We've seen this time and time again in the military, right? But my investigation forced them to clean that up. And it made the attempted manslaughter charge pretty much unsustainable. So I'm almost certain she's going to get off the hook for that. Any charges that do stick and that she is eventually convicted for, if that happens, I don't think Aruba wants to see a good American citizen go to jail. Not for this sort of thing. I very strongly suspect they're going to say, okay, listen, you're not guilty of attempted manslaughter. You might be guilty of some of these lesser charges. You've already spent a month and a half in our jail system. Go home, stay home. Would discipline the officer for potentially, being a little trigger happy here, because you could make that argument. In Aruban law, they will they will trail drunk drivers for days before they use force, literally days. And the lawyer Chris gave me a very clear example of that. And he said he doesn't understand why they decided to use deadly force on Cody in that situation, when other situations.
And I think that's that's where that hole is for me in the story. That's where it doesn't make sense to me. But I think, like I was saying, the interesting part is that this will be just another story from Aruba, and it's amazing that you got to go down there, see that, make these help out this investigation. it just kind of goes into your whole career. It's always been kind of unconventional. Everything you've done in the
Yeah.
military has been kind of unconventional. You weren't supposed to be at first group, but you got the first group. Uh, you know what I mean? Like you got done with the
Yeah.
infantry and you're like, hey, I'll go special forces. You go special forces.
Yep.
You get out, well, not get out, but you go to do your masters and then you come back to the teams
Yep.
and, you know, it just kind of is unconventional in everything you've done. The Combat Diver Foundation is a great organization. So what I want to do to kind of wrap this up, I want you to give your final where people can find you, how they can help out, and just what they can do to kind of move this situation forward. Because I think this is, especially this deep dive 2021, has a great cause behind it, and I want people to help out as much as they can.
I want to, if I could, just take 1 minute to wrap up on the Cody Shakir case.
Absolutely.
And this is sort of an unfortunate kind of thing. So again, a very tense family dynamic there. Waleed and Khaldoon decided they weren't interested in what I was doing or what Seven Arrows was doing to help the situation. And they hired a gentleman called Ted Simon. Ted is a very well renowned international lawyer based in Philly who's got a reputation for solving international problems because he worked on the Amanda Knox case. He's a high profile guy, probably cost a lot of money. And they brought Ted Simon in literally the last couple of days that I was in Aruba. Not coordinating with us at all, coordinating with Chris to a certain degree, but it was not clear to me. I mean, I had done all the work. It was done. The heavy lifting had been done. What I had done, I knew that when I left Aruba, that Cody Shakir was going to get out of jail because of what I had done. I knew that. And bringing in Ted Simon seemed like a ridiculous waste of money to me. No, you know, with all due respect to him, we had done what needed to be done. Now he ended up organizing a letter writing campaign, character references on behalf of Cody, and I think she got something like 27 letters that they sent to the prosecutor in Aruba saying that she's a good girl and all this, and she is. But you know that isn't worth $70,000 or whatever they're paying him. And so it's a little bit frustrating to us at the Seven Arrows side because the Khalid and Kim side of the family stopped answering emails that didn't pay their bills. And so there's a lot of pressure, we imagine, from Khaldoon and Waleed to leave Seven Arrows in the lurch. And there's still an outstanding bill that's paid, and now there's a lawsuit involved. And that's really unfortunate because on April 1st, Cody Shakir left Aruba by the orders of the prosecutor and is basically free in the United States now because of what we did. So, you know, Khalid, if you're watching this, pay your bills, man. It's, you know, we got your sister out of jail. Yeah. So that's the sort of punchline of that story. Now,
once again,
shifting over to
unconventional though. Yeah, that's an unconventional end to a story. Hey, this is all done. Okay, good. Go fuck yourself.
Yeah. They stopped answering emails, and I stayed away from the family because, you know, I just wanted to focus on what was going on, and I let Mario and Joe handle the family and whatnot. And Mario and Joe are true professionals, and they've actually paid their contract to me, and I appreciate them for that because they're really taking it on the nose. You know, they got stiffed by a family whom they helped.
Yeah,
they did a fantastic job helping them out, and in fact accomplished a mission where nobody else could, including the $75,000 international lawyer. But Seven Arrows did it,
right?
And they haven't been paid.
Well,
that's
what
it.
can we do to help the Combat Diver Foundation, the Deep Dive 2021, and just you in general?
Go to combatdiver.org. You will see a link to Deep Dive 2021, which is our Combat Diver Union and fundraiser. It's on the 21st of August, 2021. So 21, easy to remember. Come down to Pensacola, and if you can't make it, you can still bid on prizes, which helps us with fundraising. You could still run the 5K, which also helps us, and hopefully we'll be able to raise a little bit of awareness for service member and veteran mental health along the way. Yeah, that's it. Check us out. And hopefully, I'll meet a bunch of you down at the Floribama for a good party on the beach.
Lino, it was definitely an honor to meet you. We've been trying to get this in the works for quite a while. You had some travel going on, and I'm so glad that we got to do this. You are a super interesting guy, and I'm so glad you did it. Guys, go help this guy out with Deep Dive 2021. It's a good cause. Combat Diver, it's one word, Combat Diver, not plural, just diver, combatdiver.org. Go there. You can help out with the charity. You can help out with doing the virtual 5K. You can help out with sponsoring things on there to just move this event forward. Last year, it didn't really get to happen, so this year they're trying to come back with a bang. If you want more of me, you can find me on Twitter at DoubleSpeakDJ. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD Podcast, and you can find me on YouTube at the DTD Podcast, where all these conversations are in video form. That's going to be it for the show, guys. That's Lino. I'm DJ. This has been it. We'll catch you on the next one. See you later, guys.
DJ, it was great, man. It was great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.